Welcome to Sound Bites, hosted by registered dietitian nutritionist Melissa Joy Dobbins. Let's delve into the science, the psychology, and the strategies behind good food and nutrition.
Hello, and welcome to the Sound Bites podcast. Today's episode is about digestive health, probiotics, prebiotics, and fermentation. And this episode is sponsored by PepsiCo, and we thank them for their support of the podcast. My guest today is Dr. Elieke Kearns. She is a principal nutrition scientist at PepsiCo. She has a PhD in nutritional biology with an emphasis in both immunology as well as biotechnology. And she has her bachelor's degree in clinical nutrition from UC Davis and is also a registered dietitian. Elieke is on a mission to make food less confusing through her nutrition research expertise, consumer packaged good background, and deep appreciation for agriculture and food production. Welcome to the show, Elieke.
Thank you. It's so fun to be here. It's so exciting to be on the other side, not just listening to your podcast today.
Yeah, and I understand you're a huge fan of the show, and I really appreciate that.
I love it. I've been listening to your shows for, on my commute initially. It's changed a little bit with COVID, but yes, a huge fan. I'm very excited that we get to chat about what I think is a really fun topic.
It is. It's a fun topic, and I'll admit, it's a confusing topic. I have attended many presentations on probiotics, and I always seem to get it at the time. And then I start getting confused, wait a minute, probiotics, prebiotics. So you've got some really great information to help us make sense of this. And we've got some great resources for the listeners as well. And before we jump into all things pre and probiotics, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you became interested in nutrition and how you came to PepsiCo, but also maybe some of your background and work history.
Yeah, I would love to share that. It's been quite a journey. I think at the foundation, nutrition has always been a huge part of my life. I grew up in a family where the foods that were put on the dining room table were put there with a lot of thought and a lot of purpose, in part because my little brother had very severe food allergies growing up, but also because my dad grew up on a dairy farm. And so that agricultural appreciation has really been trickled down and definitely passed on to me. So I grew up in the Netherlands. When I was 10 years old, we moved from the Netherlands to California for my dad's work. And then fast forward a few years, I was a freshman at UC Davis. I enrolled completely undeclared, had no idea what I wanted my major to be, and was tinkering with the idea of maybe doing interior design. And eventually stumbled upon an introductory nutrition class that really was my first aha and exposure to being able to not only study nutrition, but potentially develop a career in nutrition. So I ended up declaring clinical nutrition. At Davis, there were two different types of nutrition majors you could pick, and I chose clinical. But candidly, I had no idea what that meant. It was just an interest, and it seemed like the right choice at the time. Come my junior year of undergrad, I started hearing all about these dietetic internships, and that was the first time I really heard about registered dietitians. I found that there were two camps within my friend group. One camp was very ready to graduate from undergrad and never take another exam again. And I couldn't relate. I definitely realized that I had way too many questions still and wanted to continue to learn more. So I applied to these dietetic internships, which I'm sure all the registered dietitians who are listening totally understand that you apply to a ton of these internship programs. And even then, you're told that you might not get in. So I also applied to grad school programs at the same time, because I did realize no matter what, I'm not done going to school. So I did my internship. It was a very clinically focused dietetic internship. It was a year-long process. And
where was that?
It was at Napa State Hospital in California.
Okay.
And so after that year, I realized, okay, I'm very thankful I'm a registered dietitian, but working on the clinical side of things, it wasn't quite my calling. And I found that I had so many questions as I was writing these dietary prescriptions for patients and talking to doctors of what is the scientific mechanism for this prescription that I'm giving someone. It's so nerdy, but going back to grad school just seemed like the absolute right fit. So pretty soon after I became a dietitian, I moved straight back to UC Davis, started a PhD program there in nutritional biology. And at that point, really, the only thing I'd figured out about my career is that, yeah, nutrition is still what my passion is and what I'm excited to have a career in. But the very specifics of what that career is going to look like, I still had absolutely no idea.
Mm-hmm.
So as I was going on this grad school journey, I was a TA for all of my time in grad school. Really great experience, but it gave me another aha of, I don't think academia is the right track for me either.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, well then maybe working in the lab, like actually collecting the data is where I belong, because I do really appreciate all the science behind it. But after so much pipetting and running all these ELISAs for months and years, I realized that I wanted something in a little bit more of like a social environment. And so it honestly became a little bit discouraging because everything I tried was this very hard, nope, that's not what your career path is going to be. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned in the intro, I do have a degree emphasis in biotechnology. And one of the requirements for that happened to be that I do a 3-month-long industry internship. And so that's really what initially gave me the exposure to a career on the industry side. I was able to get an internship opportunity the summer of my 3rd year in grad school, I believe, and it was with the National Dairy Council here in Chicago. And that was this incredible eye-opening opportunity where I realized there are so many career options within nutrition that I had no idea of. And it dawned on me that I love this fast-paced environment. I love that the work was so grounded in science and that we were moving the field forward still, but that it was also a heavy emphasis on the translational side and really giving the data legs and making sure that the right people understand and interpret the science correctly. Mm-hmm. So after that summer at the National Dairy Council, I went back to California. I was so on fire and so eager to just wrap everything up for grad school. And then very luckily, a few months later, I actually got a call from the Dairy Council and they let me know that they had a job opening. So that's how I moved to Chicago. That's how I ended up in the Midwest. That's where I'm still at. I worked at the Dairy Council for a total of 3 years, and it was a fantastic journey. I led their childhood nutrition research program. I got a lot of really good experience translating the science and exposure to regulatory affairs. And then after those 3 years, a different opportunity appeared, and that was working at RX Bar. Very different. So this took me from a trade association where we were, of course, championing for all things milk, cheese, and yogurt, to now working for a company where it was just one brand. And don't get me wrong, I still love and I get excited about a jug of milk, but it's not quite the same for me as when I see a product for one particular brand that I help bring to market. So working at RX, it really was a wild journey for me. It was a very young, very rapidly growing consumer packaged goods company. And this was a brand that quite literally is upfront about what is in the product. So there I set up their scientific affairs department, where it really was our goal to be transparent about the science behind each of those ingredients, be very direct and very truthful through just simple communications, and educate for the purposes of internal awareness to make sure that, of course, all my marketing colleagues were proud and excited about the science behind these ingredients, but also to help the business make decisions that were grounded in science too. So, like I said, it was a wild ride, though. I was there for about a year, and the company, we grew so fast. I look back on that with a lot of positivity, and it really allowed me to take a big step back and think about, what have I achieved so far? What experiences have I had? And what would be a good opportunity for a next step? And so looking at my resume, I saw that I had trade association experience. I had this small entrepreneurial startup experience. And then I really had a lot of questions about what is it like to work for a big legacy company in the consumer packaged goods space. So I now work at PepsiCo. I'm part of their global nutrition science team. It's very different, to say the least, but I'm really enjoying it. I've been there for about 1.5 years or so now, and I'm consistently amazed at how everything we do is so grounded in science. I'm part of a team of just brilliant people. In fact, over 70% of our entire global nutrition team has an advanced degree. That's pretty impressive.
It is.
Yeah. And so I'm constantly learning, and it's really energizing. And so I'd love to tell you a little bit about what our day-to-day as nutrition scientists at PepsiCo looks like. We are involved in products from start to finish, and that really, I think, is what I'm so excited about, that every single day of my work looks so differently. I get to have a hand in everything from the ideation process of when new products are developed to help refine the concept, to digging through the science and scoping out what new potential ingredients we could be using with the nutrition top of mind, as well as brainstorm what claims might be feasible for our products. On top of that, we also work to ensure that all of our products meet the PepsiCo nutrition criteria. And I don't know if that's something you've heard of before, but essentially the PepsiCo nutrition criteria are part of this transformation journey that the company embarked on in 2006, with the end goal truly being to promote a healthier future. There's multiple sustainability goals that are on a corporate level included in this. And there are some very ambitious specific nutrition goals as part of that. One of those being that we want to reduce the amount of added sugar, reduce the amount of saturated fat, as well as reduce sodium. All, of course, while trying to keep that taste that we know people love and encourage the increase of food groups to encourage, as well as those nutrients to encourage. So if you want a specific example of that, one of our goals for 2025 is that at least 3/4 of our entire global food portfolio is not going to exceed 1.1 grams of saturated fat per 100 calories. So to help achieve those big corporate goals, our nutrition science team developed PepsiCo nutrition criteria that we then apply to every new innovation so that by come 2025, that goal has been achieved.
I'm so glad you shared that, because I understand with the food industry that these types of conversations and goals are taking place, but I don't think the average person realizes what goes into trying to make products healthier moving forward. So thank you for sharing those details.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, honestly, it wasn't until I joined PepsiCo that I became aware of this either. And I've been in the nutrition space for a while. So
I know that you've done a lot of work in the digestive health space. Could you tell us a little bit more about PepsiCo's journey with digestive health?
Yeah, it's actually, there's a funny anecdote that I can share about that in regards to where the name Pepsi came from. So we have to go all the way back to 1898 when there was an entrepreneur in North Carolina, and he created this beverage that he called Pepsi Cola. And he began offering it to his customers in the pharmacy that he owned. And he called it Pepsi because that was based on a term, on a medical term, dyspepsia, which essentially means digestive discomfort. I, of course, wasn't around in 1898, so I have no idea what kind of substantiation would have been required for that kind of a claim. But I can tell you that fast forward to today, we have a wide array of products that help support digestive health.
That's very interesting. I had no idea that those roots were there. That is very interesting. Dyspepsia, Pepsi, PepsiCo. Interesting.
Yeah.
I can relate to so much about your background, and I won't touch on every point because my listeners have heard some of this before, but I can really relate to knowing that I wasn't done learning and the grad school experience. And of course, we share the Dairy Council background as well. And I think based on your experience, it just really illustrates that oftentimes you do need to try something to see if it's the right fit for you. And I always say this, we have, so many great opportunities in our field, and it's exciting to find something that really feels like a good fit and is so fun and energizing. So I'm really glad that you're in the space that you're in. And you mentioned you're here in Chicago, as am I. So maybe post-pandemic at some point we can actually meet face to face, or at least have a social distance cup of coffee or something.
I would love that. Yes.
So great. Thank you so much for sharing more about your background. I want to transition now and jump right into this exciting topic. I was doing a little bit of research, and I believe that 2 out of 3 adults in the U.S. experience digestive issues. And we know it's been a trending topic for many years, and the research continues in this area, and it's really exciting. And we know that there are a lot of different factors that affect our digestive health. ranging from family history or genetics to stress and, of course, what we eat. So we're going to focus on what we eat and drink, but let's just start with some definitions and explanations. So tell us, and remember, my audience is part health professionals, but also part general public, and I know you do a great job of translating the science, but what exactly are probiotics?
Such a good question. It sounds like such a simple word, but really there's so much behind it. Let me start at the very beginning. So probiotics are essentially, they're microorganisms. They are alive. They're bacteria or yeast, and they can offer a health benefit. There is currently no federal definition by the FDA for what a probiotic is. And so it's treated more like a supplement, which makes the labeling of probiotics a little bit of a gray territory and challenging.
Because supplements aren't regulated the same as food and beverages.
Correct. Yes, correct. And even though there's no FDA definition for probiotics, luckily for us, there is a scientifically agreed upon definition for probiotics. And that's what we refer to. It's still quite a mouthful. The actual definition, the scientific definition of a probiotic is, are you ready?
Yeah.
It's a live microorganism that, when administered in adequate amounts, confers a health benefit on the host. That's a mouthful. It's just one sentence, but it's quite a lot to digest, pun intended.
There you go. I love it.
So if you break that definition down and really start to look at the individual components of what is a probiotic, you start to see that there's a few requirements. It has to be alive. This is very important. That means that the probiotic has to be alive when it reaches the microbiota. And microbiota is also a big term that I would love to clarify just a little bit, because we often see a lot of confusion here too, where we see people talking about microbiota and microbiome, using them interchangeably. And actually, microbiota with the TA at the end, that's the colony of actual live organisms. Whereas microbiome with the ME at the end, that is the collection of the DNA of those organisms. So when we're talking about the actual bugs, we're talking about the microbiota.
In the person's body.
Yes, in or on, depending on which colony you're talking about. Okay. Because on your skin, for example, you also have a microbiota. The biggest microbiota, the most common one that we talk about, is in our gut. Okay. So the gut microbiota.
Got it.
So for something to be a probiotic, it has to be alive. And if the goal is to reach the gut microbiota, it has to be alive by the time it reaches the gut microbiota. So that means it has to survive not only the journey of creating the product, the food or the beverage or the supplement, but it also has to survive the acidic environment in your stomach, and it has to go all the way through your colon. So that first word of the definition is quite darn important. Another really important thing about probiotics is adequate amounts. Those are two words found in that scientific definition that we really can't forget about, because depending on what type of a probiotic that you're talking about, the adequate amount is going to be different. I like to think of this kind of like vitamins and minerals, how we have different recommendations or different adequate amounts that are needed. The same is true for different types of probiotics. Okay.
I've heard that before, and I like that analogy.
Yeah, I think it helps bring all of this stuff to terms that we recognize in our day-to-day. The other thing with amounts is it's not measured in grams. Probiotics are not measured in cups or teaspoons. They're measured in something completely different. And you'll often see the letters CFU when talking about probiotics. And that stands for colony forming units. Basically, what that means is that's the number of bacteria that are able to divide or that are alive. Just because you have more CFUs in one product versus another, that does not necessarily mean that the one with more colony forming units is going to be better. We have to look at the type of probiotic that is in that product to figure out what is the adequate amount. And to figure out what the adequate amount is, you actually have to look at the science, like literally go to PubMed, type in the type of probiotic that you're looking for, and figure out what the adequate amount is.
Okay.
What else is in that definition? The words health benefit are really critical. So in order to be considered a probiotic, it has to be able to confer a health benefit. And the health benefit, just like to figure out what the right amount of the probiotic is, you have to look at the science. The same is true to figure out what is the health benefit. You look at the science to find that answer.
Great. Yeah, and I understand different strains of probiotics or different types of probiotics have different health benefits. So could you touch on that?
Yeah, so even the word strain, I think, can be really confusing. When we're talking about probiotics, or if you're looking at a label and you see a probiotic name, that name can be so daunting. It can appear as though you're talking in a foreign language.
Yeah,
if you
Latin.
Yeah, no, really.
It is.
Yeah, exactly. I think a good example is Lactobacillus acidophilus, and then you see a bunch of like letters and numbers at the very end of it. And that is a whole 3-component set that you will find in an ingredient statement or on the back of a supplement panel. It's divided into 3 separate categories, and the naming of a probiotic is actually how we name all living things on the planet. It's broken down into a genus, a species, and then a strain. And the strain, that's what I mean when I'm saying the type of probiotic.
Okay.
The genus is a very general grouping together of organisms that have similar characteristics. I like to think of this in terms that's more familiar to me, like dogs. They are also living things, and their classification is set up in the same way. The genus of dogs is the same genus as wolves and coyotes. When you get a little bit more specific, you get to the second part of the name. That's the species. And then you would be talking just about dogs. But to really know what kind of a dog you're talking about, you have to get to the strain level, which is equivalent to the breed.
Okay. I like that. Great. Well, I know that probiotics have been available as supplements for some time, but we are seeing them more and more in foods and beverages. In fact, I just did a podcast episode on functional foods and beverages and supplements with some consumer insights. So people can tune into that if they're interested, and I can put the link in the show notes to this episode at soundbitesrd.com. But when we're seeing the probiotics in foods and beverages on packages, what should we look for on food labels? What's required? And how do we know, besides reading this long name with the genus, species, and strain, give us some ideas of what we should be looking for?
Yeah, great question. And because it's not defined by the FDA, there's not a whole lot that is required to be on the label. But what you can look for is if you see a product that says probiotic anywhere on the label, I would suggest you flip it over, look at the nutrition facts panel, scroll all the way down to the ingredient statement, and see if you can find the probiotic strain. So look for that long, foreign, Latin-looking name. It should have all 3 components, the genus, the species, and the strain. You can also look, and again, it's not required for companies to declare this, but you could also see if anywhere on the pack it says how many colony-forming units are in there.
Those CFUs you mentioned.
Exactly. Because to make sure that you're getting the health benefit that you're looking for, you want to ideally also note how many CFUs you're getting, because the health benefit you're only going to achieve at a certain amount of CFUs. I've seen some products declare it, some products don't. If they do declare it, it's always interesting to me to see if it says when they measured that. Was it measured at the time that they made the product, or was it measured at the end of shelf life by the best by or the use by date, for example? Because if you remember, these are live organisms, so the number could change from beginning to end when it was made.
Yeah, and I touched on this briefly. There's a lot of research on various health benefits from probiotics, but we're really talking mostly about these digestive health benefits today.
Yes.
So I know there's also some confusion between probiotics and live and active cultures. Live and active cultures is a term that we've seen and known about for decades. So how does that differ or compare with, say, a probiotic?
I'm so glad you asked, because that is, I think, where we see the greatest confusion. Live and active cultures are bacteria and yeast. It's essentially an umbrella term. Probiotics are a subcategory of live and active cultures. But that means that there are a lot of live and active cultures out there that are not necessarily probiotics.
Okay.
And that's where we're seeing a lot of confusion. it means essentially that these non-probiotic live inactive cultures, they don't meet all the criteria that we just talked about of what a probiotic is. So they might not provide a health benefit when you eat them at a certain amount.
Okay.
But that's not to say they don't have functions. These live inactive cultures, they could be responsible for things like fermentation, which is really critical in a lot of foods and beverages.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question is, so if the live and active cultures aren't necessarily providing a specific health benefit directly, what would their role be? So let's talk about fermentation. This is a term that we're hearing more about lately. And so if you can explain what is fermentation or a fermented food or beverage, and why is it important?
And we're seeing it pop up everywhere now, right? It's all these fermented products are so popular. Kimchi, kefir, yogurt, and of course, all the kombuchas.
Huge kombucha fan.
You and me both. But if we talk about how you create those fermented foods, there are a few things that are required. You're going to need a substance. In the kombucha example that we both love, the substance is going to be a tea. You're also going to need sugar. This could be naturally occurring sugar. So if you're making yogurt, for example, the sugar is the lactose that's naturally found in the milk. But it could also be sugars that you add or sugars from fruit. The third thing you'll need is those live and active cultures. And then you're going to need the perfect environment. You're going to need the right pH, the right temperature. And when all of those things come together, the live and active cultures, they break down the sugar and they turn them into something else, such as alcohols or organic acids. And that process, that can change the texture of the food. It can change the taste. It can create that common kombucha, more sour flavor that we're used to. It could also increase the shelf life of a product, or it could promote certain health benefits.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just thinking with kombucha, which I have to admit, before I tried it, I thought, oh yeah, that's not for me. I'm not a big tea person. I don't know. I just thought, I'm not so sure. And then I tasted it and I was like, oh my God, there's carbonation. There's this sour flavor and it's just so refreshing. I just was pleasantly surprised. Does that fermentation, like the carbonation that you would have in a kombucha, is that from the fermentation or?
Can be. It depends. If you're talking about Kavita, which is the only kombucha that I'm able to speak to, we do add some carbonation after the fermenting process to make sure that we do provide that bubbly taste that we know that they love.
Mm-hmm. So fermented foods, do they contain probiotics by nature then? I mean, I shouldn't say by nature. I don't want to be confusing, like naturally containing probiotics. What I mean is, do fermented foods contain probiotics?
Depends, maybe. And really the only way to know is if you test that product and see if that specific strain or specific type of probiotic is in there at the right amount. So what you'll see is most often to determine that there are actual probiotics in there, again, look at the ingredient statement and see if probiotics have been added, because that is the only way that you can really make sure that the right amount of the right type of probiotic is in there. Or if it has specifically been tested, and then it would also say that this probiotic strain is in this product at this amount.
Okay, yeah. And certain products might go through further processing. Like you might have fermented batter for bread or something, but then once you bake it, the fermentation it's done its job, and the processing, the heating would have destroyed the probiotics or the live and active cultures that created that process to begin with?
Yes, absolutely. I've been on the sour bread trend since I've been quarantined. And so I've been making a lot of bread recently. And you see the process of these live and active cultures doing their job overnight as the batter rises. That's the fermenting happening right in front of you as a result of the live and active cultures. Those might be probiotics. They might not be. I've never actually analyzed the types of live and active cultures in my sourdough. But to your point, when you then bake it, the heat of it destroys anything that was alive in that bread. And the end result is definitely a fermented product, but it has no live and active cultures in it and definitely no probiotics in it. The same is true if you were to pasteurize something. You bring it up to a high enough temperature to make sure it's safe for consumption, but that means you're also killing all of the live and active cultures that were in there. So to make sure that you then have probiotics in the finished product, you want to at those after the pasteurization step.
I see. And we're going to talk about some specific products in a little bit. And that was a question that I had. And I thought that's what happens is because you do pasteurize your juices in your kombucha, if I understand correctly. And then in order to have the amount of the CFUs that are needed to confer this health benefit, you add them after that.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, good. Well, not to confuse things more, but I get really confused when we start talking about prebiotics. So explain what a prebiotic is and how that is different from a probiotic and what the role of the prebiotic is.
Yes. So it's different by just one letter, and it couldn't be more confusing. Just like with probiotics, there is not a FDA definition for prebiotics right now either. But again, luckily for us, there is a scientific definition that we can turn to and that we use. And are you ready to hear that one? It's a little bit easier, but still pretty complex.
Oh, I'm ready.
A prebiotic is a substrate that is selectively utilized by the host microorganism conferring a health benefit. So we can break that one down as well. Substrate, that first word of the prebiotic definition, in the context of a prebiotic, the substrate is often thought of as a fiber. It doesn't necessarily have to be a fiber, though. But what is really important to know is that if it is a fiber, it does not mean that all fibers are prebiotics.
Mm-hmm. And not all prebiotics are fibers, but often they are.
Exactly, yes. So in order for this substrate, that might be a fiber, it might not, but in order for this substrate to be a prebiotic, it also has to be selectively utilized. And really what that means is that not all of the microorganisms that live in your microbiota are able to use this. Mm. In fact, only the microorganisms that can use it are the quote from the definition, the host microorganisms that confer a health benefit, which basically means the beneficial bacteria that already live in your colon. So at the most basic level, if I were to translate that prebiotic definition out of scientific jargon into general speak, prebiotics are essentially food for the beneficial bacteria that are in our microbiota.
Okay. I've heard that before, and I held on to that. Is it true to say that a prebiotic is food for a probiotic?
It could be, but there could also, so probiotics don't necessarily stay in your microbiota. They travel all the way to your microbiota. They're alive. They then work together with your microbiota, but they can then be excreted. And there are other beneficial bacteria in your microbiota as well, other than the probiotics.
That use that
exactly
prebiotic as food. Okay.
Exactly. Yes.
Got it. Okay. And so when it comes to labels, again, I don't know that I've noticed a lot of, or any foods that say prebiotic on them. What would we see in the grocery store?
Yeah, again, it's challenging. So I've been seeing it a little bit here and there that consumers are now starting to get more savvy in this space and are looking for the words prebiotic. But very often, to your point, you won't see the word prebiotic on an actual food. So if you're looking to increase the amount of prebiotics in your diet, you got to go on a little bit of a scavenger hunt. And to really make sure that this product has prebiotics, just like with a probiotic, I'd encourage you to flip that product around, look at the nutrition facts panel, and again, scroll your eyes all the way down to that ingredient statement and look for words there. You're not going to find the word prebiotic in the ingredient statement, at least more than likely you're not going to find it there. What you instead want to look for is synonyms. So inulin is a prebiotic fiber. That is an ingredient that would show up in the ingredient statement. Something like chicory root fiber is also a type of inulin, which would show up in the ingredient statement. And then occasionally you'll find more sciencey sounding words in the ingredient statement, like fructooligosaccharides or FOS. That's also code for this contains a prebiotic. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're right. It's a challenging landscape to navigate.
Yeah, and the whole labeling regulations, it's very complex. But I do recall starting maybe back as far as the early 2000s, seeing the word inulin like on yogurts and then becoming familiar with the chicory or chicory root. on labels. That's pretty familiar to me. So one of the common questions that crops up when we're talking about probiotics, prebiotics, and we're touching on fiber a little bit in the sense of prebiotics, but let's just stick with probiotics. Can probiotics help with the gas and bloating? We know that they're good for digestion, but what about the gas and bloating? Can they help with that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one that we're hearing a lot, especially from healthcare professionals. They might. That's really the answer. It's going to depend on what type or what strain of probiotic that you're consuming and whether or not that strain has been shown through all the science to help with that particular health outcome. Unfortunately, it's not as simple of a yes or no answer. One resource that I would recommend you go check out is the US Probiotic Guide. It's done a little bit of research for you where you can see specific products, what probiotic strains they contain, and what the science says the health benefit is. You don't have to go through PubMed and dig through all of that scientific literature yourself.
Oh, yes. We don't want to do that unless we really like doing that. So is that something I could link in my show notes at soundbitesrd.com?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. I will do that. So then that makes me wonder, with inulin and chicory being a prebiotic, can eating or drinking prebiotics or too many prebiotics result in that gas and bloating?
So what I would say is if you haven't been consuming a lot of prebiotics, it's probably not the best idea to go from consuming none to really large amounts. I'd encourage gradual increase in the diet. There has been some research that, of course, has looked at this to see what the average person tends to tolerate. And for inulin specifically, 5 grams of inulin per serving appears to be tolerated pretty well. When you start to consume about 20 grams of inulin per day, that's when you might start to experience some discomfort. So again, everyone is different. I would say talk to your doctor or your dietitian to really make sure what's right for you. But
that sounds like similar advice we hear to just fiber in general. You want to increase it gradually and your body adjusts to that healthy fiber.
Yeah, exactly.
Good to know. Well, let's touch on some of the specific products that you've been working with. We mentioned the kombucha, but I know that there's other ones that I'd love to hear about. And then we're going to talk about some great resources that we have for people and where they can get more information. I know that there's a webinar that I'm going to link to and this great probiotic handout that I have in front of me that I'm looking at as you're talking. And it covers everything that we've been saying. And it's really nicely laid out in a visual format that I know is going to be great pinned up on my wall so I can refer to it whenever I need to.
I love it.
Let's talk about kombucha.
Yeah, would love to. So KeVita is a brand that I work very closely with in my day-to-day job at Pepsi. KeVita has 3 different lines of products, actually. One of them is a kombucha. There's also a sparkling probiotic line, and then there is a apple cider vinegar tonic. So depending on your flavor preferences, there's something for everyone. But one thing about every single one of these KeVita products is that they all contain probiotics. Another brand within the PepsiCo family is Naked Juice. There are some flavors within the Naked portfolio that do provide probiotics as well. One of those is the tropical mango flavor. And then if we're talking about prebiotics, if you're looking to add more of those in your diet, we of course have options for you too. Again, so with Naked, there are some flavors there that use the inulin fiber as a source of prebiotic. Tropicana launched a new product called Tropicana Essentials that is high in fiber. Again, using inulin as the source of the prebiotic, and the strawberry banana flavor is a crowd pleaser. And then on the food side, because we do have foods and beverages, on the food side, we also have some prebiotic products. Quaker oatmeal, for example, has some high fiber instant oatmeal SKUs that also use inulin as a source of prebiotic fiber.
Excellent. Good. And I've tried many of those products. I've seen those in the store, and I'm always looking to get more fiber in my diet and my family's diet. And so I've really enjoyed those. And I'm glad you mentioned about the KeVita because it's not just the kombucha. My favorite is the sparkling probiotic drink it's really light and refreshing, but they're all really good.
I agree. I like the kombucha, but I'm with you. The sparkling probiotic drink, it's been so good in the summer. Now that we're switching seasons, maybe I'll drink some more kombucha. But
Absolutely. We've got some great resources. Kavita actually has some videos. I think there's 6 different ones, and I'll link to those in my show notes that focus on fermentation and pasteurization. And I already mentioned this new probiotic handout. But is there anything you wanted to mention about the videos or the handout? And then also tell us a little bit about this webinar if people want a deeper dive into probiotics, prebiotics, fermentation, and so on.
Yeah, I would definitely say if you have the time, check out these Kavita videos that you were just talking about. They're really fun whiteboard videos that have audio layover. They're very simple explanations. We just created a few more this year that are up on our website to help explain these complicated topics of probiotics, prebiotics, fermentation, pasteurization, like you said. So they're really simple ways to digest this complicated information. They're both for consumers as well as very helpful for healthcare professionals.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, not just for health professionals, but consumers really can learn and understand because of the format. Like you said, with the whiteboard, it's really well done.
Thank you. I'm glad you like it. And then the other thing that you were talking about is the probiotic handout, which I'm happy to hear you have pinned up against your wall. I hope many other people will follow suit. We just finished that. It's 2 simple pages, a PDF front and back that talks about what probiotics are and really tries to distill all that complicated information in a simple format. We'll have some more coming out, so stay tuned. We should have one about prebiotics in the near future as well, but I hope that can be a great resource for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the webinar. Yes, we are doing a webinar about probiotics and prebiotics to really drive all this home in a different format. And I'm presenting that together with Dr. Hannah Holscher, who is really going to go even deeper into the science with us. So I'd highly encourage you to listen to that recording, which I'm sure, Melissa, you'll link to.
Yes, I will definitely include that link in my show notes. In wrapping up, I guess it occurred to me that I didn't ask, how much of probiotics and prebiotics and fermented foods are we supposed to be getting? Clearly, if we're not getting any, we should increase, and we should increase gradually. But do we even know how much we're supposed to be getting?
Such a good question. For prebiotics, let's start there. There's no adequate intake level. There's no daily value for prebiotics, but the standard recommendation tends to be about 3 grams per day. Like we talked about, 5 grams per serving doesn't seem to really cause any digestive discomfort when we're talking about inulin, and even higher than that, depending on who you are and what your daily diet looks like. When it comes to probiotics, also, there's no standard recommendation of how much you should be consuming. And it gets even more complicated because that adequate amount is so dependent on the strain of probiotic that you're looking for. So I can't give you one specific number. The best I can say is talk to your doctor, talk to your dietitian, and together look at the science to see how much of that specific strain do you need for the health benefit that you're looking for.
Yeah, and some kombuchas do have a small amount of alcohol, but it's my understanding that the Kavita Master Brew kombucha is verified non-alcoholic. So I wanted to double check on that with you.
Yes, true. Very good. So like we talked about in the fermentation portion, our Kavita kombucha is a fermented product. We use those live and active cultures to do the fermenting. Then we pasteurize the products. And that's to make sure that it is safe for you and I to drink. That pasteurization process, of course, is going to kill any potential pathogens. It's also going to kill all of those live and active cultures that did the fermenting. One of the reasons why we're so proud of that is exactly because of the alcohol content question that you just raised, because we know that's a huge concern for a lot of consumers who want the kombucha, but want to make sure that they're not consuming any alcohol. So because we pasteurize, we stop the fermenting process. And if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be in control, and the fermentation process could continue to go on, and therefore potentially increase the alcohol content. So yes, we pasteurize, and then we also do send the product off to third-party testing to make sure that we fall below that legal limit of alcohol content, so that we truly are non-alcohol verified.
Great. Yeah. And just one more comment, because I know across the board, Americans are not getting enough fruits and vegetables and fiber in general. So it is really nice to see the Naked Juice and the Tropicana Essentials fiber that do contain the prebiotic fiber, but it's also providing vitamins A and vitamin C that we need from produce that we're not getting enough of. And then oatmeal, Can't go wrong with that. We need more fiber and soluble fiber that we would find in the oatmeal. And I also believe that one of the Quaker instant oatmeal fiber options is a fiber and protein.
Yes, that's correct. So offering delicious and nutritious products, variety of options. And I agree, it's really nice to have these juice options that do have the added fiber because that is something we know people are looking for.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing all this wonderful information and breaking down the science for us. And I just think it's really important that as health professionals and as the general public, that we understand this complex information so we can have more confident conversations about this topic. And it's just really exciting to see the research and the products coming out about this.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. This is definitely something I have so much passion and excitement towards. And I hope that we're able to share that with everyone listening today.
Absolutely. And like I said, we've got a lot of resources for people in the show notes, and I hope they check out your Nosh It Food Facts information. I know I'm following that, and it's been really fun and interesting. And thanks again for coming on the show. For everybody listening, as always, enjoy your food with health in mind. Till next time.
For more information, visit soundbitesrd.com. Music by Dave Burke, produced by Jag in Detroit Podcasts.